Okay, can we get started? Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you very much for attending this discussion on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and how it applies to internet policy, children's policies. My name is Larry Magid, and along with Ann Collier, who is sitting straight ahead of me, I'm co-director of ConnectSafely.org, which is an NGO based in the United States but works globally around issues somewhat child protection but more child empowerment, working to provide a world in which children can truly help drive and control, in some sense, their experiences on the internet. We work a lot to educate parents and policymakers, and we mostly try to get them to understand that the internet is not only a positive force, but a lot less scary than some people want to make it, and understand that children not only have a vital role to play, but have a vital leadership role. One of the reasons that we are so interested in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is in reading, and I believe it's Article 19 or 21. Article 19, I think, it spells out free speech rights, free expression rights for young people. And it mentions any media. I don't have the text in front of me, but the bottom line is that children, according to the law that was signed by every country in the world, with the exception of my own United States and Somalia, gives children the right of free expression, the right, which means not only the right to speak, but the right to seek information. Yet, having said that, even not only the United States, which has not ratified it, but even countries that have ratified it, often don't follow the letter, or for that matter, even the spirit of that law. We have countries, for example, that are passing legislation that would restrict access to the internet for adults and children. And we have many countries who take a very patronizing attitude towards children, restricting access, limiting what they can do, and banning access, for example, to Facebook and other communication technologies in certain locations, most notably school. While I would never argue that children should be allowed to be polishing their Facebook profiles instead of doing their mathematics work, I would argue that children do have a right of expression and a right to use the tools of expression as part of their educational process, just as they have the right to give a speech in class expressing their political or social opinions without being threatened or intimidated, or I'm not sure the word muzzled to translate, or suppressed by the educational system around them. So the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child provides a very broad and interesting framework. In the United States, there is an attitude which I find reprehensible, that children are, for all practical purposes, the property of their parents. Now, it is true that we have laws that protect children from being beaten by their parents or sexually abused by their parents, and those are good laws, and I'm glad we have them. But we don't have a law that, number one, gives children privacy regarding their parents. Parents have the right to snoop and spy and listen to what their children are saying in the United States. There are rare cases where that right does not exist, but it's widely accepted in the U.S. that they have the right. And parents have the right to censor what their children can do on the internet, whether that's banning sexual material or whether that's, in some cases, even banning religious or political material. So I would argue, and I apologize for this, that my own country not only didn't sign the convention, but is not abiding by the spirit of the convention as part of the customs which our country operate on. But I would also argue that many of the countries that have signed it are also not abiding by either the spirit or the letter. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend John Carr to go into a little more detail about why we're here today.
Hi, good morning. I'm John Carr, and I'm here on behalf of the NGO network called INAXO, the European NGO Alliance for Child Safety Online. We organised this event this morning, and thank you very much for coming. I'll just say briefly what INAXO is, for the one or two of you in the room who might not know. INAXO came into existence, legal existence, in 2008, when Save the Children Denmark, along with the NSPCC in the United Kingdom, established it. And it's now a network consisting of 19 NGOs from different member states within the European Union, all children's organisations, all charities, all concerned with children's rights, children's welfare, children's education, children's development from a range of different perspectives. And in addition, we have a number of associate members from countries like Russia, from Turkey, Armenia, and various other places that are obviously not within the European Union. And the thing, in fact, there are 25 children's NGOs altogether that go to make up INACSO. And we came together because, as children's organisations, we understood two important things about the internet. The first, and I really want to kind of triple underline this point, the first reason was because we understood and appreciated the positive benefits of the technology, the positive benefits of the internet in particular, and all the different devices that can now can connect to it for enriching children's lives, both in terms of their education in school, both in terms of the communication possibilities that it opened up for them and their families and their networks, and just generally as a place to have a lot of fun and keep up with the music and sport and things of that kind that they're interested in. And it's one of the reasons why, for example, we very much encourage and support companies and governments, and the European Union in particular is very active in this space in creating more positive content, useful content for children and young people on the internet. You know, many years ago in Britain, the new Labour government back in 1997, they spent £1 billion putting computers into our school system. What they overlooked, they realised it eventually, was that having the internet was a good start, but if there was no content on the internet that was any use in schools, or there was no content that was interesting or important for children, the technology would simply not be used. And for years, in those early years of the last years of the 20th century, we had wonderfully equipped schools, but not much going on the internet because there wasn't that much positive content there. That's changing, absolutely is changing very, very fast, and I'm happy to say. But having emphasized that point about how strongly we are in favor of and are enthusiastic about the technology, we are children's protection organizations, children's welfare organizations. So we have to focus on aspects of the technology, aspects of the way that the internet works, which are not so positive and are not so good. I'm being harassed by the chairman here. Do you want to ask the question now?
Well, let me just
go on.
What I'd like you to address briefly, and perhaps others can address this issue as well on the panel, is the trade-offs between protecting children and also enabling or empowering children. So how do we protect children without being so patronizing and controlling that we're actually taking away their rights?
Okay. Well, I think the short answer to that question is it all depends on the facts. I mean, in a general, we've got within all of our legal systems, and it's certainly evident in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, we've always got tensions. We've got polarities. We've got, on the one hand, broad brush statements about the right to access information, about the right of free speech, about the right of association and assembly and things of that kind, but we don't want children associating with paedophiles. We don't want children associating with necessarily extremist political organizations. We don't want them accessing necessarily information about how to kill themselves or how to kill other people. So there are these tensions which, to be honest, I don't think it's very helpful very often to stay at this level of 35,000 feet and discussing just generalities, because in the end what matters are the facts of the case, and it's always about proportionality and making individual judgments. So Larry did not successfully divert me from my speech. He helped me along with it there, and I'm just now going to go back onto why did we call this meeting. And there's one of the things that triggered it was I had a meeting with a very well-known major internet company that is headquartered in the state of California, USA, a Romney-free zone, and I asked them about you know, why they weren't taking steps to prevent children from getting access to material that clearly they never intended children to be able to get access to, adult content. And they quoted the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child back at me as the reason why they didn't take these positive steps. And they said, well, under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, we have to have regard to the evolving capacities of the child. So if we set rules of that kind, we could potentially be transgressing this important principle that the UNCRC enshrines. That's to say, having the need to have regard to the evolving capacities of the child. Now, I have to say, I thought originally they were joking. I thought, well, hey, you know, they ignore it in so many other ways, but here they're citing the UNCRC as a defense of what you might call very liberal policies. But the point about that comment was, what it made me realize actually was that the UNCRC, for us, it's like the Bible. For us, it's like Holy Writ. I mean, it's such an important document in the child protection space, because for the first, and we're going to hear more about this in a minute from somebody who knows a great deal more about it than I do, but certainly in the world I work in and that I move in, any reference to, it's like going to mass, you know, you have to sort of do a ritual obeisance towards the UNCRC because of its historic importance and the way for the first time ever at an international level it framed the rights of children and declared the rights of children in a very, very valuable and helpful way. But what it's never done is engaged in any direct way with the internet industry and the internet world, which is the world I live in. So it occurred to us as INAXO it would be very, very good at least to begin a discussion about the UNCRC and from a sympathetic point of view, because, you know, as I said, we regard the UNCRC as an exceptionally important and valuable document. But we need somehow to bring its principles more to the attention of and make the internet industry aware of them in a way that helps the discussion, not hinders it. Frank LaRue, who did a big study on free expression and free speech for the United Nations, published it I think 2 years ago now, or not that long ago. He was very, very clear. He said, absolutely, free speech, freedom of expression is a sacred right, but states have an obligation, not a right, an obligation to protect children from exposure to things which they're not meant, which could be harmful to them. And therefore, he said, there is no absolute right of free speech, there is no absolute right of free expression. It's always got to be tempered by, and indeed should be tempered by, states' obligations to protect the vulnerable, of whom children are perhaps the biggest group. So really that was the whole idea behind trying to get this meeting together, and I'm really glad that we were able to get, well, Larry and I of course are world experts on everything, but to get Maria and Jasmina, and now we've got a third one with us as well, because these people work with this document and in this space all of the time, and we really would like to engage with them and look forward to the discussion.
So, John, thank you very much. Thank you for organizing the panel. I'm not sure which company you were talking about, but I probably live within a half a mile of it. And as far as I can tell, we don't have pornographic billboards in our communities. If anything, we have censorship in our schools. So I don't think there's a huge issue in America. 49% of our population just today in America supported a candidate who would probably be more than happy to suppress free speech. So fortunately, about 50% supported the other guy, so we're okay. I'm not going to say who is who. In any case, Maria Herzog from Hungary is a sociologist and a professor and a member of the UN Committee on the Convention of the Rights of the Child, so looking forward to hearing her comments.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I really feel privileged and honored to be here today. It's not an easy task to tackle the child rights and the internet, but before going into it, may I just say that with this current victory in the United States of the acting president, we only hope that we can help him even if not ratifying the convention, but implementing it at
Yeah.
least. But the good news for the United States at the same time is that you actually ratified the 2 optional protocols, one on children in armed conflict and the other one, which
Yes.
is relevant from our perspective, the optional protocol on sexual violence exploitation. And I guess this is a good basis for the United States also to utilize the information. And just a very small remark that the 3rd country that hasn't ratified because they haven't got a chance for that was Southern Sudan,
Oh.
which is the newest state, and obviously they are a bit preoccupied with other issues for the time being and not ratifying the
We'll
convention.
send Mitt Romney over there since he's unemployed. Maybe he can help out.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So, coming back for just a second, for who I am, I've been a member of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child since 2007, and it took a long while for me to learn how to work with the convention. So today I will very briefly tell you a number of issues about the convention for those who are not aware of it. Probably most of you know the convention and the way we are operating. But I'm also the president of Eurochild, which is the umbrella organization in Europe of NGOs, experts and some local authorities working on child rights, social exclusion and child poverty. And we only hope that NACSO can join us at some point and we can work together much closer on the issues we are also tackling today. Now, concerning the CRC, as most of you probably know, the UN CRC is a universally agreed set of non-negotiable standards and obligations in a comprehensive structure. It was approved by the General Assembly of the UN in 1989, actually on the 20th of November, which is traditionally the Day of Child Rights. This year it will be again celebrated. And there have been 3 optional protocols. I mentioned 2 of those already. The 3rd is also extremely important from the point of view of the media and internet use. That's the opportunity of children to submit individual complaints to the committee. Now, there are good news and bad news. The good news is that it was opened for ratification and on the 29th of February this year. And although 23 countries signed it so far, 19 of them European, but no one has ratified the convention yet, and that means that it's not operationalized. On the other hand, the committee hasn't worked out the protocol's methodology on how children could complain, because just like in the case of the internet and free speech, it is a very complicated process how to empower children to submit complaints to the committee, who can represent them, what kind of support can they be given to submit their complaints, and how can they be reached, especially those hard to reach children who are the most vulnerable and who would need the most opportunities to complain if they are not satisfied or they are not getting enough support at home. Now, I also have to say that although the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is the universal agreement on child rights, there have been 2 very important previous documents. The first in 24 already, and why I'm mentioning it is that in 1924 already child rights seem to be important enough to have a so-called Geneva Declaration, and the basic principles on child rights are already there in the 24 declaration. And there is another reason why I'm mentioning it, because there was a mother and a father, so to say, of this declaration. The mother being Eglantine Jebb, who was the founder of Save the Children after the First World War from England, a very powerful woman who was sure about that children need to be provided with rights. And the father of it was Janusz Korczak, who was a Polish Jewish pediatrician who, and we are celebrating this year, Korczak year, all over Europe and all over the world. Actually, in Poland, there will be a huge closing conference dedicated to the work of Janusz Korczak, who was one of the authors of this Geneva Declaration. And it is amazing when you are reading his writings and you are looking at his activities that already in the first decades of the 20th century, practically he knew everything and did everything what we know about children's rights and the way we should handle children. So that is very important for us to also to look at this heritage. There are, however, other UN treaties that are also relevant from the point of view of the issues we are talking about today. The Universal Periodic Review submitted by the countries, by all the members of the UN, are very important because in that case not an independent body, not a committee of experts are investigating it, but actually the other countries, other governments are asking questions. They are raising questions and they are also putting together recommendations for the countries, and these are very powerful ones. Very often children's issues and child rights-based issues are raised there. CEDAW, which is related to gender issues and women, primarily are important because from the girl-child point of view, this is one of the delicate issues we are tackling. The CRDP, which is quite a recent one on the rights of disabled people, including obviously children, and again access to internet, the opportunity to express themselves and to be heard is important, just like the Convention on Social, Economic and Cultural Rights that is closely related. So these are the basic standards, human rights, which are the minimum entitlements and freedoms, and it should be respected. However, it's a wishful thinking rather than the reality in many countries even today. The other issue what I would like to stress is that children are also human beings. That seems to be quite obvious, but as we've just heard in the United States and many other countries, children seem to be a property of adults and not individual human beings. And as Maud de Boer de Bocchino, the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, used to say, children are not mini adults with mini rights. And this is a very important message, I guess, for all of us. Yeah. Can we go to the, yeah. So there are four very important basic principles, and I don't want to go into the details, just listing them: the right to survival and development, the protection from harmful influences, abuse and exploitation, and this is relevant from our point of view today, to participate fully in family, cultural and social life, which is also extremely important. Children are individuals, they are members of families and communities, and we have to respect their right to participate in all types of activities as individuals. The right to non-discrimination, the right to non-discrimination and the participation of the children and respect of the views of the child, and I guess this is one of the most relevant articles we are talking here today, or the principles. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Maria, I'm not going to ask you to defend an American law. If anybody should, I suppose it should be the Americans in the room. But we have a law in the United States called the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which of course is a very well-meaning piece of legislation initially designed to protect children from being exploited by marketing materials and having their information taken. But the result of that law, at least as currently implemented by companies like Facebook and other social media companies, is to ban children under the age of 13. And even though it's only an American law, because these companies operate globally from the United States, that law, for all practical purposes, is enforced around the world. My question is a comment you made about family rights, about how children are encouraged to participate in all types of activities. I have heard examples of a family, for example, having a reunion where family members from around the world get together, and all of the adults and all of the teenagers are going on to social networking sites like Facebook and planning these reunions, but unless the children under 13 are lying about their age, they are excluded. So I'm wondering, how you feel about the implications of this USCOPPA law for children under 13 in terms of its limitation on their participation rights.
Well, actually, I have a very strong view on these kind of rights, but that has nothing to do with the legislation of any kind. As far as I see, and obviously I'm coming from child welfare, child protection research, and I've been teaching social workers for ages. Therefore, my view is that if we are sure that we can protect children through our child rearing practices, and children are brought up in a nurturing, stimulating environment when they feel safe and they have enough protection from the adults around them and from their peers, then we don't need any special protection, because they know they are resilient enough, and this is what I wanted to say later on, that they are resilient enough to know what is harmful for them, or at least even if they are curious or try to go into dangerous situations, children are risk takers, and that's fine to a certain extent, then obviously we can't avoid all the tragic consequences sometimes, but the number of issues, the number of risks are decreasing dramatically. So where we should put our emphasis is rather strengthening children, empowering them, making them resilient, and helping them to understand what are the risks and how to ask for help and where to get proper information. That's how I see. And perhaps many wouldn't agree with me.
No, thank you for that comment. We had a session yesterday that my colleague Anne chaired, where we had a young, I think 13 or 14-year-old young woman from Denmark, who made that very point. She said, I should be allowed to take chances and take risks, and that's part of learning.
Sure.
But of course, she again was a resilient child who had the resources internally to handle those risks.
Yeah. However, there are obviously very vulnerable groups of children in the society, and they need special attention and special protection.
Yeah.
So it is obvious that we just can't say that we trust the procedure. We have to do everything we can to prevent the harm caused to children.
And I definitely want to bookmark that, and I definitely want to talk about that later. Our next speaker is Jasmina Byrne. She's a child protection specialist.
She hasn't finished yet.
Oh, you weren't finished? Oh, I apologize.
No
I thought you were wrapped up.
it was too long, so you don't want me to finish.
No, I thought you wrapped up. I apologize. Excuse me.
No. I'm
Okay.
fine. For those who are not aware of the fact that all state parties, meaning that all besides the three who haven't ratified the convention, are reporting to the committee in every 5 years. Now, this report is based on a questionnaire, on a methodology, so it is easy to follow. And these reports are submitted to the committee, but most of the countries are also submitting through their NGOs so-called shadow reports. And these shadow reports are very helpful for us to learn more about the actual situation in a country. Not every country's government is so keen to give us a realistic picture on their implementation of the convention. Now, the important thing from our point of view again is that we are having now a new technology in the work of the committee. All the plenary sessions, meaning all the country dialogues, are webcasted. And this means that not only professionals, but even children can follow the discussion. The other side of the story is that in the framework of these shadow reports, we are getting more and more reports from children themselves. And very often, in these alternative reports, children are not writing. They are not very happy if they have to put together written materials. But what we really like is that they are putting together DVDs or different kind of booklets. They are sending us drawings. And also, we have Skype or online connection often. So, for instance, when we had a meeting with the government of Peru, prior to that, we had a Skype conference with the children from Peru who couldn't come to Geneva, and there was no point in it. But also it enables much more children to have a direct contact via the modern technology and even social media, obviously, with the committee members during the sessions or outside the sessions. Now, and other two very quick important information for you, that we are also producing so-called general comments, and these are the detailed descriptions and explanations of the different articles. And last year we were launching our new general comment on protecting or preventing violence against children. I was fortunate enough to chair the steering committee of that general comment, and there are at least 6-7 places where we are mentioning internet and the media partly as a positive, an opportunity for children, but also as a risk, and that children need protection and appropriate information given. Another important issue that every year the committee is organizing a general day of discussion. And this year we had an interesting one on migration on the 29th of September. But in 2006 there was one on the right to be heard on the Article 12, and I was quickly looking at all the materials of that general discussion day, and I couldn't find any kind of mention of the internet in 2006. So this shows how time has changed and how fast the changes are, because obviously today we wouldn't be able to run such a program without the internet mentioning. But the good news is that the committee has decided that we will have a new general day of discussion on media, on social media and its influence and technology influence on the children next year. And I only hope that all those present here and organizing this conference and making it available for us will be our active partners and contribute to it. Now, I was listing a number of articles, but I don't think that it is needed to, pick each of them that are especially relevant from the internet and internet use and information flow point of view. However, we have to say that the UN Convention is a comprehensive set of values, and we don't like to pick the articles separately because it's not very helpful. Next one. Yeah. So what we would need is a child rights-based approach, and that needs a holistic vision. Right to information, learning, listen to expressing views, but also looking at the dangers. And I guess there are many, many important elements that are very useful to mention. For instance, what the committee is recognizing that in Africa, mobile phones are playing an extremely important role in enabling children to communicate and have access to modern technology, even in places where internet is not accessible. The other issue what I would like to raise is that children living in poverty, in extreme situations, in deprivation, have no access to modern technology. And from the education point of view and information and free speech point of view, this is a real barrier, and we can see the impact of it on the widening gap between the opportunities of children throughout the world. So I guess this is something we should look at much more closely, and enabling children to have access to all possible information flow, and that's roughly what I wanted to say, because we have to have a balance with the protection and the opportunities provided.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I find it ironic that the Europeans are so strong on the right to be heard and equally strong on the right to be forgotten, which kind of makes me think about some speeches that I've given where people hear me and then forget everything I've said. The next speaker, I apologize for interrupting you earlier, but
No
finally, Jasmina Byrne, who's the child protection specialist who works in research on child protection and internet uses for UNICEF, and she's based in the very lovely city of Florence.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for this introduction, and thank you for, can you hear me? Yeah. For inviting UNICEF to participate in this panel, and it is really very important for us that we have an opportunity to express our views, but also what we do globally. Somehow this discussion about rights of children on the internet has been influenced by the wealthy countries and high-income countries, and we often forget the middle-income countries and rapidly developing countries and the impact internet can have on these children. So having said that, I just want to say that from the points of, from the rights point of view, we know that internet offers opportunities and hazards, and as Maria was mentioning, there's a whole number of children's rights enshrined in a convention that deal with the right to expression, the right to seek information, to express views, and to be heard as well. Freedom of association and assembly as well. But internet also helps children's education opportunities and learning. The hazards we've talked about in the previous session, also about protection from violence and abuse, from sexual exploitation, sale and trafficking, but also rights to privacy. In UNICEF, we address this issue through research, which is carried out in our Office of Research in Innocenti, but also through our country offices and regional offices. Those of you who don't know UNICEF, we are a very decentralized organization. We have presence in 150 countries, and we also have national committees in high-income countries, which are independent in a way from the UN system, and they do a lot of work in their own countries on advocacy for children's rights as well. We also advocate governments for policy change, programming. We carry out awareness-raising campaigns through country offices and regional offices, and my colleague Kate here, who works in Department of Communication in New York, will tell you a little bit more about that. And we also encourage corporations to protect children's rights through application of business principles and children's rights. And the arm of UNICEF that deals with this, again, through our country offices, is Corporate Social Responsibility section in New York. So what you see here is actually a study that we conducted last year. Here, John has a copy. I put down a few copies, but they've gone. I think they're all gone. But it's available online. This is a shorter version of a study that has about 140 pages that involved a number of experts and 2 years in the making. John was one of the experts who helped us with this study. It was put together by Jerison Lansdowne. Many of you might know her. She's a child rights expert based in the UK. And it really is the first kind of a comprehensive attempt to look at the usage of children, of internet by children, the risks they face, the opportunities they have, but also vulnerabilities, to see what are the legislative responses and challenges to law enforcement, but also to see what are the strategies that have proven to be effective globally to protect children from sexual abuse and exploitation. Apart from that study, we have done also some country office country reports. Kate will mention the one on South African mobile generation. The Vietnam one is just coming out soon. Also, through our programs of violence prevention in schools, for example, we have done quite a lot of research on cyberbullying. Croatia is one of these countries leading in Europe on that. When it comes to our study, the scope of it was, as I mentioned, the usage of children, the scale and nature of sexual abuse online, including child pornography, but also grooming, sexual solicitation. And one of the issues that was mentioned, but not really looked so much in detail in this study, is cyberbullying, that has emerged as one of the key issues for children, actually. And we were discussing today the percentage of children that are really affected by sexual solicitation and harmed. It's much smaller, but the number of children who feel that they're harassed on internet is higher, and often they're harassed by their own peers. So what we found through this study was that children use internet in similar ways all over the world, for learning, communication, social networking, gaming. There are few differences between boys and girls. Parents in industrialized countries are catching up with their children. So the EU Kids Online study, for instance, has shown us that parents in high-income countries in Europe do know more about internet than we really think so. However, that's not the case in the developing countries. In Vietnam, for example, only about 7% of parents are able to catch up with their children on what's going on internet. And one thing I have to mention is that a family setting, a family composition is very different. In many places, we don't have nuclear families where you have mother and father and 2 kids. In many developing countries, families, extended families, grandparents, parents are migrating, some have died. And who are the responsible persons and adults in children's life who have to provide guidance and support to children also when using internet is something that we really need to look from different points of view and to see who are these carers that we need to talk to. Not to mention also children who are in care of the state and who are not with their parents, children who are in institutions. In Indonesia, for example, where I used to work before I joined UNICEF in Florence, there are 500,000 kids in institutions. And these kids probably have access to internet as well. And as we know, kids are moving very fast from fixed to mobile communications. So the popular fear, as we talked earlier, that children endangers all the kids is really not true. But it is kind of, it's a bit like riding a bicycle, as somebody made this comparison once in one of the conferences I attended, is there's certain risks, or crossing the road. You know that there's certain risks involved in this, but you do want your children to be able to manage these risks and to learn how to navigate that space. And it's the same with internet. So it is really important to empower children to avoid these risks, report when harassment and protection violations occur, and our job as adults is to support and create enabling and protective environment for all children. When we talk about the vulnerability online, there were also mentions today, some children are more vulnerable than others, and researchers are not in agreement about who are these vulnerable children. Some people think, and some researchers, particularly from Europe, say that on the internet, everybody is equally vulnerable. It doesn't matter what are your previous conditions or your family circumstances and so on. However, there is more and more research in support of the fact that there are certain children who are more vulnerable to risks on the internet than others. And those are children who have a history of psychological problems and difficulties. Children from different socioeconomic circumstances and poorer neighborhoods, children that don't access internet at home, who may use internet cafes, for example. In the Philippines, we found that being a big problem, for example. Also, personal characteristics, sex, age, ability, and disability are important. In countries where attitudes to violence are, well, I'm not going to speak only about South Africa, but in many places in the world, the cultural attitudes are such that they tolerate violence. If violence is happening in the physical world, it'll be more pronounced also in online world and put kids more at risk and in danger. Also, it's important to apart from the family support and awareness that can put children also at risk and be part of their vulnerability. States that do not have proper legislation and protection laws for children, these children could be more vulnerable also to risks on the internet. I just quickly want to show to you that our study shows what are the sources of protection based on interviews with children carried out through EU Kids Online and other studies, but also through studies that we conducted with children. Sources of protection are parents who are online themselves, but who know how to use internet, but also who do not impose restrictions on children, but actually use communication as a tool to help their children understand internet. If children feel that their internet rights are going to be compromised by telling parents that they've encountered any problems, they're not going to tell their parents. Because if the parents say, oh, that's it, you're not going there anymore, they'll just avoid telling their parents. However, the biggest source of support to all children are their peers. And if they have a problem, they'll first go to their friends and tell them. And that tells us also more about how to actually develop. I think if we skip this one, I'll skip the law enforcement one just in the interest of time. Because we were talking about it a lot today, and I think we can't emphasize enough how important it is actually to create this support network around children, but also not only children's resilience, but to try to build on the protective factors in their environment that already exist. And these protective factors could be other peers, could be other children, could be older brothers or sisters or peer mentors, and children listen to them more than they would listen to adults. So this is one of the most effective strategies when it comes to addressing risks that exist on the internet. Of course, other strategies include removing impunity for abusers, including the proper legislation, cooperation among law enforcers across different jurisdictions. Increased protection for children and youth. Exposure to harm includes also the private sector responsibility, which we discussed in the previous panel, but also ensuring that children have enough opportunities to access support and recovery services. What our study found was very interesting is that social workers are not necessarily in tune with the risks that exist on the internet. We have a number of specialists and experts who are working in the field of internet, and then you have a number of, and even child protection on the internet, a number of those who are working on child protection in the physical world, and they're not necessarily talking to each other or have the same language or understand each other. What is really important to understand is that internet is the extension of the physical world of children. It's not something in addition to their lives. It's part of their lives. It's integral part of their lives. So if we are finding solutions to children's problems on the internet, we need to actually look at their lives holistically, and every professional that has contacts with children have to be aware also of risks and opportunities that exist in relation to internet. John and I were together at a meeting in Istanbul, the big ISPCAN conference, some of you probably know. And interestingly, the professionals who are talking about child abuse in the physical world don't really talk to those who are talking about children on the internet. So bringing these professionals together is one of the really important tasks that we have ahead of us. So hopefully the committee can help us in that sense. So I'll give the floor to Kate now, and then I'll say a few words about our social corporate responsibility. Yeah, okay.
First of all, I can forgive you for using John Carr as an expert, because I was very impressed in reading your report. You also called upon, you mentioned Sonia Livingston from EU Kids Online and David Finkelhor from the Crimes Against Children Research Center. So congratulations on what I think is a very well-documented report based on data as opposed to speculation, which has been so often the problem. You mentioned, you kind of reinforced what Maria said about resiliency. You said that some children are more vulnerable than others. So my question to you is, how do we craft messages that provide the proper messages to the broad community of children, most of whom are not particularly vulnerable, but also provide the support services and the messages to the vulnerable children? I've come to the conclusion, and Ann and I talked about this and we wrote about it when we did the Obama administration's online technology working report, that one size does not fit all. Yet that's been pretty much what our field has done up to recently. So I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that's a very good point, and I actually liked your discussion about a public health sector approach to addressing the needs of all children, but also addressing the most vulnerable. First of all, we need to know who these most vulnerable children are, where they are, what are the risks they face before we even start developing these strategies. And in some instances, it's much easier if we know that these are the kids who use internet cafes, then we can have separate strategies for internet cafes. For example, there were in the Philippines a code of conduct of internet cafes owners that targeted particularly this particular group, but also youth mentors who were working with these groups of children who were using internet cafes. However, if we're talking more about personal characteristics and something that is inherently, the vulnerabilities are not so obvious, then it becomes a little bit more difficult. So
okay.
I think, yeah, it's $1 million question. I wish I had an answer to that, but it's something we need to figure out.
And thank you for bringing up the public health model. We talked about that in an earlier workshop, about different levels of intervention and prevention depending upon the risk level of the people we're talking to. I want to introduce Kate Pavlicek. I hope I got your pronunciation correct. She is the Digital Citizenship and Safety Coordinator for UNICEF, based in New York.
Sorry. Good morning, everyone. As you heard, I am the project coordinator for our Digital Citizenship and Safety project based out of New York. And I'm part of a team we call the Civic and Social Media team, which does a lot of work around youth engagement for UNICEF, and a lot of the work around social media for the organization. And the basis for the project is really to get a better understanding of how young people in developing countries are using social media and digital tools, and to identify the opportunities and risks. We have a wonderful body of knowledge from industrialized countries about young people and social media and the internet, but in many developing countries, this information is lacking, it's incomplete. So we work together with country officers and with colleagues like Jasmina at Innocenti, as well as many other partners, academic organizations, industry players at country level, to understand the situation better at country level so we can engage our government partners and take the appropriate actions. And I just wanted to share some of the findings that we've had from two of the countries that we've worked in recently, and to show you some of the results and some of the information that's come out of there. Obviously, just like for children all around the world, in many developing countries, socializing and entertainment are the primary use of the internet. Children are using Facebook, and then there are also many country-level platforms which children are engaging on. So, for example, in South Africa, where up until recently, access to, well, actually, fixed-line internet access is still very difficult, but a couple of years ago, when smartphone penetration was low and feature phones weren't as popular, a local social network called Mixit became really popular. It's mobile-based and works on really, really simple phones, and it's incredibly cheap compared to the cost of SMS. So you'd find that children, even in from very disadvantaged backgrounds, were using this social network. And there's some statistics there comparing the use of these social networks and platforms for educational versus socializing purposes. And it was interesting for me to listen to the children yesterday afternoon talking about how increasingly for them social media and the internet play a role in their schoolwork and their education. And I think from these statistics you find that that gap is also, well, those two are also starting to come together in many of the developing countries. Then generating content and using the internet and social media as a platform to talk about issues that are important to young people is also very important. In Vietnam, we find that quite a lot of young people are generating their own content, they're writing blogs, and they're using social media to reach out to their peers. In South Africa, Mixit is used both by young people to engage each other, but it's also used by civic organizations to engage young people. For example, the South African Parliament has a youth body that used Mixit to conduct polls with young people about what they felt was important in the country's future. One of the issues that we look at in all the countries we work in is that of digital divides, both on gender, on urban-rural, and also socioeconomic divides. And indeed, while mobile is helping to bridge that gap, there is still quite a pronounced divide between rural and urban children, and indeed rural and urban populations. We also look at some of these risks, potential risks to young people's safety. Privacy is an issue that needs to be understood better. We found that young people are sharing a lot of personal information, but I think we need to know more about how they're sharing it and how well aware they are of the risks. I personally feel that we can't just say that, sharing this and that is bad in itself. Social media is about engaging with people and about broadening our horizons, but again, that resilience becomes really important, and empowering young people to be able to make the right decisions and to take the right actions if they feel that they're no longer having a positive experience. Cyberbullying is an emerging issue that we've been looking at. Again, as Larry mentioned in our earlier session, the statistics differ. The majority of children are not experiencing harassment and cyberbullying, but I think quite a significant number are. And again, it also depends on how you ask the question and the definition that one uses. But in the context of the internet and mobile, this is still a large amount of children, and it's important to understand this issue better. So, for example, in South Africa, when we surveyed the mixed population, we had around 20,000 respondents, and around 20% of those respondents had said that they had experienced some form of bullying or harassment on the platform. And exposure to inappropriate content is another area that we're looking at. In Vietnam, we found that quite a large proportion of young people had usually accidentally come across inappropriate content. And I think that links well to our previous session as well, where we looked at how industry players can take a role in reducing that accidental exposure. And another important aspect of all of this is involving children and trying to bring policymakers and children together and to talk to each other when designing some of these strategies and services. And Turkey's another country that we worked in, and the country office there held a national consultation where around 160 child and youth representatives were able to engage with policymakers and academics on issues of creating a safer internet. And some of the declarations that they came up with is that ICTs should be respect diversity and empower children, particularly girls. In Turkey, there's quite a big discrepancy when it comes to access for girls and boys, so that was an important issue that came up in the country. The young representatives felt that filters must be debated in an open and transparent manner. I think that links well to what we discussed earlier as well. And that support has to be given to ensure safer access and to build the resilience of children so that they avoid the risks on the internet and in mobile. And so that's just a little bit of a preview from my side, but if anyone would like to talk about it more, I'm around for the whole week.
Thank you. Kate, you mentioned how young people are using social media in schools, and this question is really addressed to anybody in the panel and perhaps the audience as well. Yet, most schools, at least in the United States, and I think it's true generally around the world, have filters that block social media. So bringing it back to the theme of this particular workshop, is that a violation of the UN Convention to block social media in schools? Anybody can answer that besides Kate, but since you brought it up.
Well, perhaps I can say is that obviously in the context of school and education, it's a tough one because teachers, particularly, coming from the context where I came from, South Africa, teachers are under-resourced, they're managing massive classes, and there's a fear that allowing mobile phones or social media will lead to disruption and further loss of control for many teachers. But I do think that's where empowerment and education, both with teachers and with young people, has an important role to play. That I do think the potential for social media to be used for an educational purpose is great, and it has been done successfully in many cases. In South Africa, for example, the Mixed platform allows access to educational services which might not be otherwise available. For example, the companies working to make textbooks available, which sometimes aren't physically available. So if it's done the right way, I think it has a huge potential to help advance education, for example, particularly in developing countries.
Anybody else care to comment on that?
If I
Yes,
may
please.
comment on that, I guess there is another point that teachers are, in many countries, not as familiar with internet and social media as children are, and this is also causing a kind of backlog because they are too scared. Also, the quality and the access to information has changed dramatically, as we all know, so that would need a major change in the education system to accept this new technology. Again, the other point is that many, even within a given country, even in mid-income countries or rich countries, there are areas where it's not accessible. Yeah. So, and this is an issue we should tackle. If I may just say that there is another general comment in the pipeline of the committee working on the child rights and business responsibility and the business community. So we are more than happy having your contributions still to it, and we are happy to include these kind of aspects as well.
John, you wanted to make
now that Maria has actually mentioned child rights and business, I just wanted quickly to tell you what we're doing on the social... Oh, can you hear me? No.
Speak as close into the microphone as you can.
Sorry?
You get a little closer to the microphone.
Oh, I have to come closer.
Yeah,
Is
thank
that
you.
okay now?
Yes, better, yeah.
All right. I just wanted to quickly mention what we are doing in relation to child rights and business as well, and it's good that Maria mentioned this general comment. As you're probably aware, in 2011, UN issued guidelines on human rights and business, where businesses are obliged to respect human rights. The states still have responsibility to protect as well. Children are mentioned in these guidelines, and as a response to the guidelines, UNICEF, Save the Children and UN Compact have issued 10 principles for business and children's rights, trying to interpret the convention in the context of businesses. And these are the consultation lasted involved about 600 organizations and 400 children, and so it was quite a lengthy process. As a result, these are the 10 principles. These 10 principles were developed. They're not enforceable in a way that that companies are obliged to respect them, but they are encouraged. And the principles talk about, next one, the responsibility of companies to respect children's rights. And when we talk about these responsibilities, includes not to, for instance, use children in child labor, which could be also criminally sanctioned, but also the commitment to support the development of children's rights and respect of children's rights. And two principles that are particularly relevant to our debate here are the ones that deal with products and services, and also responsible marketing and advertising. And I think it's great that the committee is preparing this general comment. This book was published also by UNICEF. It's a workbook where these 10 principles are elaborated. It's intended for the businesses, and there are a number of tools in the pipeline developed by our corporate social responsibility section in Geneva, the self-assessment tools as well for the companies, and a number of other tools that will help actually businesses be more socially responsible. I think the whole point in the end really is to say that there is an added value for a company to take on children's rights focus, because they're also going to be recognized for their enhanced business image, and they actually may attract customers that are ethically conscious of children's rights, which is also good for business. So it's not only good for children and children's rights, but it's good for business. And finally, it is really a right thing to do, to be conscious of these rights and to make sure that the businesses also respect them. Thank you.
I'm glad you mentioned businesses, and we're going to go to questions in just one second, because if you look at Facebook alone, it has more members than any country in the world besides China and India has citizens. So right now, these multinational corporations, we have folks from Microsoft in the room, is one example, have an enormous amount of power. And as I think it was Uncle Ben in Spider-Man said, with great power comes great responsibility. And so it's very important that we hold companies accountable. I do want to open it up to the room and also to anybody who's online locally. I'll start with Anne, and then Anjan back there. Anne? Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you. I have learned so much from you. I just want to pick up on a few points I've heard throughout. I've been madly taking notes. The most recent first, the business thing, one of my sort of personal learning networks, besides educators and researchers, is community moderators for children's properties online. For example, Disney's Club Penguin, or Moshi Monsters out of the UK, Stardoll out of Sweden. These people are among the most experienced online safety experts in the world, because they work with children in these communities 24/7 all around the world, and it's fascinating talking with them. But one of the problems that they have cited, one of the challenges in protecting children in these online spaces, which are virtual worlds or games or whatever, is that, and I think this happened with Lego Universe, and is one reason why Lego Universe had to shut down. It was an incredibly responsible children's property, virtual world and game, and well loved by some children. I actually have a teacher friend who taught digital citizenship in World in Lego Universe, and her students were very, very disappointed when Lego shut it down. The problem is they spent so much money on locking it down and making it superbly safe that they didn't have enough of a subscriber base to keep the business running. And the other problem that moderators tell us is that the more protective a site is, the more it's so easy for kids to just move on, right? Many of these sites are free, and so they can just move to a different site that's less protective and where they can, have more sort of freedom of expression or whatever. And so education is imperative. It's absolutely imperative. Self-regulation and resilience are more key all the time. Just picking up on something that Maria said, I thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit, as Kate brought up yesterday and today, about the mobile platform. One thing I learned in Nairobi at the IGF last year, there was a guy on one of Larry's panels that was organized by Anjan from Goma in Democratic Republic of Congo. And he pulled out his feature phone, old-fashioned cell phone, and he said, I access YouTube and Facebook and all of the social media properties with this thing called Facebook Zero, which really makes Facebook very easy and free through agreements with the mobile carriers in developing countries. So all of these are available to anybody. All you have to do at the UN is follow mobile penetration in all these countries, and you have the number of children who have access to the internet. It's moving that fast. And just one other thought, we were talking about, I've heard resilience so much, and I think it's outstanding. Sonia Livingston has brought it up a lot recently in her research, and we're seeing it more and more in the research in North America as well. And one of the things that came out of some outstanding research by the Harvard Good Play Project at the School of Education at Harvard University is the lack of agency and efficacy that children feel online. And I think it's partly because the online safety field has consistently, for almost 15 years now, presented children always as potential victims. And so the Harvard, and this is actually a digital ethics research project that found in talking with young people that when they see something bad happen online, they feel there's nothing they can do about it. And if we want to, empowerment is absolutely essential, the research is showing now, to protecting children, because they are so increasingly responsible for their own well-being and that of their peers, as Kate and Jasmina brought out. So agency, the ability to act on one's own for one's own protection, and a sense of efficacy that they can effect change themselves and improve situations in their online communities as well as offline communities, I think contributes a great to resilience. And all of this is packaged beautifully in a book that I highly recommend that was compiled. It's MIT Press, and the name of the book is Hanging Out, Messing Around, and Geeking Out: Kids Living and Learning in Digital Media, and it's the product of more than 24 social media researchers' work over 3 years, funded by the MacArthur Foundation to the tune of $50 million. So it's a valuable book.
Thank you, Ann. I think I'm going to just take that as a comment. I think, Anjan, did you have your hand up? And then over here, yes. And if people would try to be brief, I'd appreciate it. We only have 15 minutes left. Okay. Well, do you mind?
Thank you very much. I would like to start with making an observation first with Maria's speech. I think 2 countries, Gabon and Thailand, had already ratified the optional protocol 3, which is the communication and complaints mechanism, last month. So that's just to add on to what you said. And I was not really madly writing down notes like Anne did. I have quite a few things. I probably won't be able to say all of them. I think the presentation from UNICEF did mention about the code of conduct in the Philippines, which, well, by the way, I'm Anjan Bose from ECPAT International. Sorry to introduce myself later. But, you know, it shows some of the work that are kind of common. We had done this in Philippines with 600 cyber cafe operators, a chain called Everything Online. A comment on the research that you did in South Africa, what I found very interesting was the ASLR concept that, you know, children are also exchanging age, sex, location, and race, which is very unique to the context, which we don't see happening in other regions. We had done a research in Africa last year with 5 countries, 3 in the West, 2 in the East. And this research, again, deals with young people's use of ICTs and how, you know, they're using tools, online tools. And I think Anne just mentioned about the Facebook Zero, which is unique because it gives free access. It's not cheap. It's free access with limited services. And we found from our study, like in Uganda, a lot of young people are actually using it. And I would like to end by saying, you know, we do address, and I think it's very much important that when we have interventions, when we have some educational tools designed, we have to validate. We have to see how effective are the messaging that goes in the design process. And coming back to the thematic issue of this session, you know, how much access or information we should give to children, balancing their protection online. It's very important because, you know, some schools or institutes, they just decide to block access because of the lack of understanding. And it's not the teachers, because, you know, the teachers can't say people cannot use it. It comes from the administrators of the schools. They also need to be involved. And we have done a project in CIS which actually deals with this, empowering the administrators of the schools about the, you know, the need for understanding this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those helpful comments. The lady right there, please, and then yourself, and then you. And then we're going to have to wrap it up, I think.
Hello,
Yes,
I'm Anne-Marie. I'm a Dutch student, and I'm here as a participant of Student NL IGF. And I think we heard a lot about the participation of children and young people in this discussion. And I really want to thank all the panel members for emphasizing the importance of participation of young people. But at the same time, I would like to take notice that there are no young children or young adults at the panel right now. So I would like to suggest that if you want to empower young people, you should also invite them for panels, and not only for workshops, but also really not only empower them to listen, but to say something and state their opinion. Because we don't live in a world that's separated of adults and young kids. It's just one world. Thank you.
I don't think anybody here would disagree with you. Thank the lady in the green? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Is this working? Yeah.
Would you identify yourself, please?
I'm Helen Goodman. I'm a member of Parliament in the UK. To go back to the original question, personally, I think the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is completely adequate. We've all known all along that there are competing principles of participation, provision and protection, and those always have to be balanced at all times, and I don't think this is any different. I was particularly pleased that Larry reminded us that the child is not a piece of property of the parents. I know that for myself, I've been quite doubtful about how to check that my children were behaving safely without invading their privacy. And I think that's a new dilemma for parents. But we also heard from UNICEF how there are many children whose parents are absent. So that brings me back to the responsibility of the companies, because all the time the message we get from the companies is you parents are responsible for your children. And I have to say I'm worried about this, the resilient child model, because if the resilient child model doesn't work for the very children who are most likely to face problems, frankly, it's bust. And it seems to me that if we draw the analogy with crossing the road and the traffic, yeah, sure, we teach our children how to cross the road, but to drive, you have to have a driving license. So I come back to the issue about the responsibility of the companies, and not just because, for example, I get young constituents coming to me saying, we've been bullied, but we can't get any... Facebook won't deal with it, Tumblr won't deal with it, so they're not being responsible. But also, you've highlighted this session that the social workers are not up to speed, and these self-same companies are not paying their taxes, which we need to improve our public services.
A very quick remark. Thank you for your contribution. What I would like to say very clearly is that according to the UNCRC, but also according to all our knowledge, parents are capable of fulfilling their tasks only if the state and the services are backing them up. And this is not happening. And I'm sorry to say that if you are looking at the UK government policy for the time being, they are closing down 3,500 Sure Start centres that could have been a wonderful tool to enable parents to be good enough parents. And also parenting capacities have to be increased primarily because parenting has changed dramatically. The demand towards parents is so different from anything in the previous decades. So we have to also challenge the information and support given to parents.
One quick comment, Helen, is that Ann and I are on Facebook Safety Advisory Board, and I would love to have a continuing dialogue with you about that so we can take that back to Facebook. I don't think they would be hostile to that, the comments that you mentioned. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just want to say I take your point, and I think these are all very valid comments, but it's not really either or. I think we all have responsibilities, parents, states, private sector, and children have responsibilities themselves for their own rights, but also for the rights of others. When we talk about cyberbullying, that's one of these cases where we have a conflict between privacy and right to expression. And I think one thing what we need to remember, there's one article in the convention we haven't mentioned enough today, which is best interest of the child, which supersedes, so to say, all these dilemmas and helps us understand how best to approach a specific issue or a problem. We just need to think, is this really in the best interest of children?
Okay, we have a remote panelist question, comment. How do we do that? I think we're... Well, while we're waiting for that, in the interest of time, I think somebody here... Yes, you had your hand up. I can't hear you. We need a microphone over here. Microphone.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Do you have the remote question now?
We have two questions.
Okay, let's go very quickly, and then we go to this lady, and then wrap it up. Thank you.
Just quick.
Yeah.
So we have a remote participant from United Kingdom. He has two questions. Tim Davis. The first one is, the panel have spoken a lot of resilience. What are each of the panel members' organizations doing to ensure we build resilience rather than adopt blocking and restriction-focused strategies? This is the first question. Second one is, why is there no youth representation on the panel? Young people have fought on the basis of our Article 12 for IGF to ask for youth participation, all workshops. So it's very disappointing to see that this panel has not been developed in collaboration with children and young people.
Okay, in the interest of time, I don't think we have time for every panel member to answer that question. So I would urge some follow-up communications if possible. And on the second question, I have to say we tried to get some kids here. Unfortunately, they had a conflict of schedule, but I don't think anybody here would disagree with the notion that it would be wonderful to have children participating, and I think that we will take that under advisement if we do a follow-up next year. Yeah, we've had a lot of youth, but the person is right, and that's just a weakness that we have to address.
And also, you can be sure that next year, when we will have the General Day of Discussion in the UN, we will include a lot of children and young people.
But we absolutely agree, and I think you had a question. I think we have to wrap it up after that. Or what? I keep getting...
It was Veronica.
Veronica?
Veronica Donoso.
Okay, can you get a microphone there? Who's got the microphone? Can we get the microphone up to the front, please? We just have very little time left. And I know your lunch is waiting, so I don't want to keep you.
Hi, I'm can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Identify yourself.
Veronica Donoso from UKids Online and also from Child Focus in Belgium. Just a quick comment on, especially in terms of resilience. I would like to say that a new UKids Online report specifically on resilience is coming up very soon. And what I think is very important to point out is that, first of all, I think it's difficult when we refer to children as a whole. Our report shows actually very lots of differences, individual differences. You would be surprised to find out in the report that boys are less resilient than girls at specific ages. All children with psychological problems are less resilient. And these children are vulnerable offline. And they do encounter more problems online. So I think it's important that we invest more resources in research. We need to know who are these children, identify them offline, help them online as well. Another research we've been doing in Latin America, I mean, UKids Online is now going to be done in Brasilia, in Chile as well. But also in Latin America, I mean, it's a continent totally absent from discussions so far. I think it's very important to see how online risks also are being dealt with. And an important aspect is the lack of state policy in these countries. So if you compare to Europe, it's a huge challenge for us because countries are not dealing with it at the governmental level. Then it's having real impacts on opportunities of children. So many children are lacking opportunities because they have unequal access to technologies. So we don't have just a developed or of non-developed countries. We have countries in between, like Argentina, like Brazil, Mexico, Chile, which seem to be doing great, which have a lot of technology implemented, but lots of risks online. So I think it's also important to bring into discussion this more universal perspective when we deal with policies, but also the individual level, and really invest in research that tells us who should we tackle and how. Because we see, for instance, in resilience that restriction does not seem to be working. That's at least the conclusion from our report. But parental mediation does. So we do recognize the importance of communication and approaches like that. But I think this is missing from our discussion, that we really need to get more concrete and develop concrete proposals. And in terms of that, I mean, there's a lot of policy that needs to be developed, but also the working together with industry. Like, how can, instead of invest money in parental controls or restrictions, how can they develop, for instance, software that can help mediate parental mediation? So, to support parental mediation, I mean. So, well, that's just a quick comment, no question.
Well, thank you. I just want to make one quick comment and then turn over to John to wrap it up because we are out of time. I've been working in this field for 18 years. I probably longer than anybody, with perhaps one or two exceptions. And the quality of the discussion today and some of the earlier panels we've had is light years ahead of the quality of discussions just a couple of years ago. We are so far beyond one size fits all. Let's scare the crap out of every parent. Let's just talk about the dangers of the internet. I just am very proud of both the panelists and the people in the audience who've contributed. This was a very high-level discussion, and I think that we are on the verge of actually breaking through in terms of coming up with some policies and some analysis that are really going to move us forward. And I want to turn that over to John for final comments.
Just to say, in particular, on behalf of INAXO, thank you to our distinguished panelists, particularly these two women who've travelled all this way to take part in this discussion. It's certainly from my point of view, been extremely valuable and interesting, because we all recognise the huge importance and authority, to go back to Veronica's point, the authority of the UNCRC and the authority of the United Nations, particularly in the developing world. It's one of the reasons we very enthusiastically cooperate with the UN, and in particular, for example, the COP initiative within the ITU, because it reaches parts of the world that no other institution and no other places can reach. So it's great to hear about what you're doing next year. I hope INAXO can help with that. And let's hope the next time we meet, we've got more good news. Thank you very much for coming, everybody.